And improved water management and soil conservation practices have kept another dust bowl from ravaging the southern plains. The hard lessons learned from the dirty 30s have so far averted ecological disaster. Still, experts warn that while another dust bowl is unlikely, it is important to remember what happened and why to ensure the black blizzards don't return to Oklahoma.
The memories of the Dust Bowl remain fresh in the minds of those who lived through it. John Vanatta saw his first dust storm in 1932 while on a trip to visit relatives in Ohio.
This thing rolled in on us, and it was so black you couldn't see the hood of the car. And when we came back home from visiting for 2 weeks in Ohio, the ground was just about like this floor. Topsoil was all gone.
The causes of the Dust Bowl are well documented. Overfarming of the land combined with a severe drought to create an ecological disaster.
So much land was broken out and there was not enough rain to keep it all under control, and the machinery wasn't fast enough and big enough to take care of all the land, and he just got away from us.
Clay Pope is executive director of the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts. Pope says the practice of clean tilling the land created the conditions that led to the Dust Bowl.
That's a recipe for disaster if you have a crop failure because you had a dry winter, your crop didn't get up, or what did get up died out, then all of a sudden you've got that ground exposed, and it sets you up for a real problem.
The crop failures brought on by drought created another problem: severe flooding. Oklahoma Conservation Commission Executive Director Mike Thrall says ground stripped of vegetation was unable to handle the runoff when the rains returned.
So in the middle of the Dust Bowl, in April of 1934, we had this huge flood event in western Oklahoma. The town of Hammond received about 14 to 15 inches of rain, and there was a big flood that killed 17 people.
In an effort to tame the floodwaters, Congress passed the Flood Control Act of 1944, establishing flood prevention projects on watersheds in Oklahoma and other Dust Bowl states. Larry Caldwell is the watershed specialist for the Oklahoma Conservation Commission.
The very first one of these dams in the nation was built in Oklahoma, in southwest Oklahoma, down Cloud Creek Site 1 near Cordell. And that started a huge construction effort that lasted for several decades.
Caldwell says Oklahoma can be proud of its success in land and water conservation.
But now, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. Most of these dams were designed with a 50-year design life. So if you add 50 years onto the mid-50s, from this point forward for the next 50 years, we're going to have 2 dams per week come to the end of their design life.
In the next 3 years, more than half the state's 2,100 dams will have reached the end of their design life. A program to help states rehabilitate aging dams provides a 2-to-1 federal funding match, but Congress must still appropriate the money to carry it out. The Flood Control Act came on the heels of several other New Deal programs to preserve the land and reverse the damage from the Dust Bowl. One of those programs, the Soil Conservation Service Act of 1935, helped spur a switch from clean tilling the soil to practices such as conservation tillage or no-till farming. Dan Harold has been using no-till practices on his farm near Hooker for the past 7 years.
A lot of advantages that look to us so far as preserving and minimizing erosion and conserving the water. You give up water every time you plow. We feel like we save several inches besides conserving the crop residue on top, which shades and minimizes the natural evaporation of water from the soil profile.
No-till farming also helped to protect Oklahoma's streams and rivers.
Most people don't realize in your water about 70% of the nutrients and bacteria that get into your water actually are tied to the soil particle. So if you can control erosion, you're going to address that. And the number one water quality problem we have in this state is sedimentation, plain old-fashioned dirt. So by reducing your erosion, you're doing more to protect the quality of your water.
In 2007, the Environmental Protection Agency's 319 grant program provided funding for a project to protect river basins, and that included the North Canadian River. Deborah Carnot is the project's education outreach coordinator. She's working with agriculture producers to encourage no-till farming and creation of riparian areas along the river.
And the two practices go together, clean water and soil conservation, because what's good for the soil is good for the water.
There are concerns that federal budget cuts could affect the EPA grants, but Carnot says Oklahoma's positive results have already led to the state receiving an extra $2 million this year.
The project itself on the North Canadian has received additional infuses of cash from the EPA from other states that couldn't spend the money. And we were going in the hole because we could spend the money. And so they took that money when those states' deadlines ran out and shuffled it our way.
Practices such as no-till farming that reduce soil erosion and protect water have another environmental benefit.
When you talk about climate change and carbon dioxide levels, this is sequestering up to 0.5 metric ton of carbon dioxide per acre per year that it's taking out of the atmosphere, restoring back to the soil in the form of organic matter, which helps restore the health of this soil.
Sarah Pope with the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts says the EcoPass program, which pays farmers and ranchers to adopt carbon sequestration practices, has helped reverse the damage of the Dust Bowl years. Those practices include taking marginal cropland out of production and planting native grasses to keep topsoil in place. It also means planting buffer zones of natural vegetation between fields and water sources to filter runoff before it can enter waterways.
The practices that we're looking at in our program and that we're rewarding producers for are those that really help curb and reverse the effects of the Dust Bowl.
Planting native grasses does more than hold the soil in place. The grasses also provide a natural habitat for wildlife, such as the lesser prairie chicken. John Aldridge heads up a program at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that helps landowners restore wildlife habitat on their property. Aldridge says landowners can borrow no-till grass planters, which don't disturb the soil, to restore native grasses.
We've taken out all of our native grasses and we come back with warm season grasses like fescue and Bermuda, and that's almost like concrete to wildlife, especially ground nesting birds.
Most experts believe a return of the dirty 30s is unlikely. Assistant State Climatologist Gary McManus says the techniques that protect the soil and preserve water have already averted one potential Dust Bowl.
The droughts we've had since the Dust Bowl, we had one similar drought in the Southern Plains after the Dust Bowl 1930s drought, and that was the 1950s drought. We didn't see the huge dust storms and the widespread devastation that we saw during the Dust Bowl, and that's because of the practices learned during that dirty 1930s.
Still, experts say the threat of another Dust Bowl can never be ruled out.
Our neighbors to the west over in Texas saw some dust storms in the Texas Panhandle. Big one hit Lubbock. And it showed that monster that is the Dust Bowl, we've kept it in a cage. That lock's not so good. And there's bars on that cages, and it can reach a paw out and grab you if you're not careful.
Pope says Oklahoma will need to remain vigilant and remember the lessons learned from the Dust Bowl.